16:30 hours. A lone Ukrainian MiG-29 tears across the Donetsk sky. For now, terrain masking kept him invisible, but in minutes, that was about to change. He was blind to the truth. 3 separate Russian defense systems already had him painted. An S-400's gravestone engagement radar registered a hard lock. Range, 38 kilometers. From the south, a Tor M2 was tracking. To the east, a Buk M3 was spinning up. A lethal lattice of overlapping missile coverage. Enough firepower to turn any aircraft into aluminum confetti. The pilot's eyes were fixed on the reconnaissance feed. Data streamed to his cockpit display. The dam at Mius-Lybivka transformed into a superhighway for the Russian military army. The drivers were Ukrainian civilians, a human shield. To avert a massacre, the strike had to be now. The MiG-29 pressed on. He hugged the Dnieper River Valley, a natural trench hiding his approach in this brutal war. His speed, 880 kilometers per hour, just 150 meters off the deck. He had one slim advantage. In the valley, the hills were his shield. They blinded the enemy radar. But that protection was temporary. In 8 minutes, the valley would bleed into open farmland. The final 8 kilometers to the target would be a naked run. A death trap. In the parlance of the Air Force, it's the shooting gallery. Through his heads-up display, the world blurred. 236 meters per second. Power lines flashed into existence, then vanished. Faster than the mind could track. This was warfare fought on pure instinct, muscle memory. His hands moved before the thought had formed. This wasn't flight. It was a controlled plummet, a ballet of G-forces and razor-thin margins. Crashing was the least of his worries. In the cockpit, the MiG's SPO-15 radar warning receiver screamed for attention. Threats bloomed on its circular display. An angry compass pointing to death. Each strobe was a direction. Distance remained a mystery. The sound of a shout in the dark. You don't know if the threat is across the field or right behind you. A constant of modern warfare. The pilot timed the pulse repetition frequency. A deadly count, like the space between lightning and its thunder. The S-400, to the northeast, painted him with slow, lazy sweeps. A 3-second interval meant 60 kilometers. Searching, a 2-second gap, 40 kilometers. Interested, a 1-second gap, 20 kilometers. A launch was imminent. His count was 2.5, a steady pulse of electromagnetic attention. Close enough to sweat, far enough to breathe. He still had options. This war analysis, this brutal calculation, dictated his next move. Stay low. 8 more minutes. As his mind processed the threat, his AASM Hammer, one of the many modern weapons in play, ran its own checks every 5 seconds. GPS signal, strong. 12 satellites locked. INS alignment, stable. Rocket motor, armed. A symphony of defense technology. But the weapon required a specific launch envelope, conditions the pilot couldn't meet at 150 meters altitude. Thinking about that now was a luxury. First, survive the ingress. Then, solve the delivery. That's the reality for these soldiers. How to deploy a €250,000 weapon from a Soviet-era jet that predates the internet. Another complication. Fuel. The gauge showed 2,400 kilograms remaining. Home was a 142-kilometer round trip. At this burn rate, he had 18 minutes of combat time before he was walking home. The global conflict had just narrowed to this cockpit, and that was only the beginning. Time was a luxury. In modern warfare, every evasive break, every pulse of the afterburner, every steep climb, bled fuel from a finite supply. The RD-33 engines were notoriously thirsty down in the weeds, gulping kerosene. A single defensive maneuver could drain his tanks. He was 8 kilometers from the line. 8 kilometers of cover before entering the kill box. High above, the unblinking eye of a military drone streamed a silent feed. The feed was clear. No vehicle movement at the objective. No Air Force assets scrambled. Not yet. He nudged the throttles. The aircraft responded, accelerating to 880 kilometers per hour. a calculated risk in this war. Every second saved was a second less in the enemy's sights. In the brutal calculus of combat aviation, both count as a win. At 16:38 hours, he hit the valley's edge. The true nature of this global conflict revealed itself. He now understood hostile defense systems. His SPO-15 warning receiver erupted. The sweeping search tones became a cacophony of immediate, lethal threats. 6 distinct emitters screamed for his attention. The S-400 battery, previously searching, snapped into a hard lock. Its search beam narrowed, focusing from a wide sweep to a pinpoint laser. In an instant, the pilot went from hunter to hunted. A half-second was all it took. The S-400's gravestone radar had him painted at 38 kilometers. The tone in his headset changed. Intermittent chirps became a solid, unwavering scream. The universal language for missile launch imminent. This is a war analysis of survival. The aircraft's advanced defense technology, its SPO-15 receiver, uses a network of antennas, feeling for hostile radar energy. These sensors listen for the invisible weapons of modern warfare. When a search radar's beam sweeps across the fuselage, the SPO-15 emits a slow, rhythmic beep. A cold warning, you are being watched. But when the pulses strike multiple times a second, painting the aircraft, the beeps accelerate into a frantic chirp. You are being tracked. Then comes the lock. A continuous narrow beam that refuses to let go. A firing solution is being calculated. That is the solid tone, the sound of impending death from modern weapons. The SPO-15 can even identify the threat. It reads the unique frequency, the digital signature, like recognizing an enemy's voice in the dark. And right now, that voice was screaming S-400, a solid lock. The engagement envelope of the system's 48N6 missile is a terrifying 400 kilometers. But down low, terrain and the Earth's curve cut that to 40. He was at 38. The math was simple. He was inside the kill zone. The only thing keeping the missiles from flying was human reaction time. The enemy troops needed 8 seconds from detection to launch. The pilot had 8 seconds. 8 seconds to break the lock. Or take a missile to the face. He slammed the stick, rolling into a knife-edge turn. 7 Gs crushed him into his seat. The maneuver put his velocity vector perpendicular to the radar beam, a classic Air Force tactic to defeat enemy defense. To a Doppler radar, if you aren't moving toward or away from it, your relative speed is 0. He became a ghost. 0 radial velocity. Doppler radars work by detecting frequency shift. No movement relative to the emitter means no frequency shift. No frequency shift means you blend with the terrain. The radar literally cannot distinguish the aircraft from the ground. The lock shattered, a momentary victory. But the maneuver cost him precious energy, bleeding, speed, and position. He was now heading deeper. Energy bled with every maneuver. His position was now compromised. Then, a new threat. A Tor M2 system flickered to life just 8 kilometers to the south, close enough to see the vehicle with the naked eye. This weapon was a different breed than the S-400. It relied on command guidance, not active radar homing. The missile itself was blind. The ground station was its eyes. The radar tracked both target and missile, feeding corrections via data link every 0.1 seconds. A lethal form of modern warfare. This made it nearly impossible to jam. You cannot deceive a weapon that does not think for itself. The only way to survive was to break the radar's lock, to push the system beyond its tracking limits. The pilot's reaction was instant. A violent snap roll left. He dove for the deck, dropping from 150 to a mere 50 meters in 2 seconds. Trees became a green blur past the canopy, close enough to count the leaves. As he plunged, his left hand slammed the countermeasures panel. He punched the chaff dispenser twice. 120. Bundles of aluminum-coated glass fibers erupted from the airframe. Each fiber precisely cut to 2.5 centimeters, half the wavelength of the S-400's X-band radar. To the enemy's radar scope, the MiG had just detonated into a cloud the size of a football field. But the Tor operated in the K-band, 35 gigahertz. It required different defense technology, a different length of chaff. The pilot hit the second dispenser. Fibers cut to 4.3 millimeters now filled the air. He had coverage across multiple radar bands. He was creating what pilots call a chaff corridor, a tunnel of false returns, a place to hide. The Tor's radar hunted, losing the signature in the ground clutter. At just 50 meters, as far as radar was concerned, he was a very fast car. But the pilot's war analysis told him he wasn't finished. His thumb found the ECM pod switch. The SPS-141 jamming pod screamed to life, instantly analyzing the Tor's radar frequency. It began generating false returns, a technique known in warfare as range gate pull-off. It works like this. Picture the radar as a searchlight. It sweeps the darkness, hunting. When it finds the aircraft, it locks on, the beam tightening. The jamming pod counters by creating a phantom, a brilliant electronic decoy. On the radar screen, it appears right next to the real aircraft. Then, the jammer begins to drag that fake signal away from the true target. Like sliding a brighter light away from an object in the dark, the enemy's advanced defense systems are tricked. The operator's screen shows two targets that slowly separate. But the fake signal is stronger, more compelling. The radar's logic follows it, believing it is tracking the real threat. Meanwhile, the actual MiG becomes just another piece of ground return, invisible in the chaos. On the operator's screen, he would be watching what looked like the aircraft slowly climbing away. In reality, the MiG was still screaming across the treetops, heading in a completely different direction. The Tor's operator was now tracking a ghost, a phantom generated by a war of electrons. The real MiG was gone, swallowed by the terrain. But flying at 50 meters is flying on borrowed time. One power line, one unseen ridge, one moment of lost focus, and he would become a part of the landscape. The pilot had to climb. The only alternative was what the military accident report would call controlled flight, into terrain. Bureaucracy's cold term for flying conscious into the ground. The release point was seconds away. 8 kilometers out, the window was closing. Whatever he was going to do, it had to be now. The pilot made a choice, one that would have failed him in flight school. But in the brutal calculus of modern warfare, it was his only chance to stay alive. Instead of maintaining tactical advantage, he would create chaos. If every enemy weapon system was targeting him, none of them could coordinate. It was the aviation equivalent of starting a brawl to escape a trap. Messy, dangerous. But in this war, confusion was its own defense. His left hand moved to the countermeasures panel, ready to dump his entire defensive suite. His right hand tightened on the stick, prepared for what the instructors called gross maneuvering, what pilots called not dying. The range compressed, 4 kilometers to the minimum release point. The next 60 seconds would decide if this military update became a success story or a cautionary tale. The fuel gauge read steady, 2,150 kilograms. Enough fuel to get home if nothing else went wrong. But in combat, something always goes wrong. The only question was how wrong, and if the pilot and his machine could survive it. At 1640 hours, the pilot did something that would make every threat receiver in eastern Ukraine scream. He lit the afterburners and pulled the nose straight to the sky. The twin RD-33 engines roared to maximum thrust, orange flames extending 6 meters behind the airframe. He went from a ghost on their scopes to a lighthouse on fire. Every radar operator within 80 kilometers just had their screens light up. This was the latest military news, unfolding in real time. Inside the S-400 command vehicle, the operator's eyes widened as the target erupted from the ground clutter, a searing, climbing contact. His fingers flew across the console. Target altitude climbing through 1,000 meters. Rate of climb, 330 meters per second. Predicted altitude in 10 seconds. 5,000 meters. The fire control computer began its cold calculations, a key piece of defense technology trying to solve an impossible problem. The target's trajectory was a frantic, changing variable. A new calculation every second. The operator selected 2 missiles and initiated launch. The sequence began. Authorization from battery commander. Granted. Missile doors snapped open. Target data flooded the weapons. Uploading to missiles. Launch in 5, 4, 3. The climb was a physical assault. From 50 meters to 5,000 in 18 seconds. Pulling 4 Gs continuously. The pilot's body weight quadrupled. His arms felt like they were cast from lead. His head, a crushing weight. The G-suit inflated, squeezing his legs and abdomen with the force of a python, driving blood back to his brain. But at a sustained 4 Gs, the grayout began. His peripheral vision collapsed into a tunnel. At 5 Gs, he would lose color vision. At 6 Gs, the tunnel would shrink to a pinhole. At 9 Gs, he'd have 3 seconds before G-lock G-induced loss of consciousness. He was riding the edge, trading his remaining consciousness for precious altitude. But there was a war analysis behind this madness. The maneuver was a calculated risk. By going vertical, he made himself the primary threat, impossible to ignore, but also impossible to predict. The pilot added a barrel roll to the climb, corkscrewing upward in a violent helix. To the SAM operators, his trajectory was a serpent climbing a spiral staircase. Their sophisticated fire control, computers were designed for ballistic paths, to predict where a target moving at X speed at Y angle would be, in Z seconds. But the barrel roll was a constant, chaotic change of angles. The predicted intercept point for their modern weapons moved, in circles on their screens, never staying still long enough for a clean firing solution. The SAM operators, with their advanced defense systems, their defense systems constantly updated firing solutions. His vertical speed, 400 meters per second. 3 separate fire control radars achieved a simultaneous lock. The S-400 from the northeast, a Buck M3 from the east, and a persistent Tor M2 from the south. The RWR no longer showed individual threats, it just screamed. A solid, piercing tone. The pilot's response was a desperate gambit, rolling inverted at his climb's apex and pulling through. The trajectory was a child's scrawl against the sky. No computer predicted it, because no sane pilot would do it. At 5,000 meters, inverted, nose aimed at the ground, he had his window. The Hammer could now reach its target. The weapon system showed green across the board, but he was centered in 3 different engagement envelopes. Enemy missiles were likely already in the air. His SPO-15 couldn't differentiate between a track and a launch. It just screamed that his involvement in this global conflict was about to violently end. A change was needed. Now, release or abort. There was no middle ground. The pilot rolled upright, steadying the airframe for exactly 2 seconds. In that space between heartbeats, the Hammer's initialization sequence fired. A lightning-fast cascade. First, the GPS receiver verified its position with 12 satellites, comparing each signal, hunting for spoofs. Second, the INS aligned, slaving its accelerometers to the GPS data. A dual, redundant navigation lock. Third, the rocket motor ran a continuity check on its igniter. Fourth, the infrared seeker performed a calibration cycle, flash cooling to -40 degrees with compressed nitrogen. Fifth, the flight control computer loaded the target coordinates, calculating the optimal trajectory for these modern weapons. Sixth, the warhead ran a safe arm check. All green, ready for release. Total time elapsed 2 seconds. At that exact moment, fire erupted from the Earth. 400 missiles screamed from their launch cells, climbing at 2,000 meters per second, aimed directly at his position. This was the reality of modern warfare. Behind them, 48 NDM missiles began their ascent. 7.5 meters of bad news, accelerating at 30 Gs. Each carried a 180-kilogram warhead that didn't need to hit directly. Its proximity fuse would detonate within 20 meters of the target, unleashing 24,000 fragments in a lethal sphere. Time to intercept, 35 seconds. With those weapons inbound, he pressed the pickle switch, feeling 250 kilograms of French engineering detached from Soviet aluminum. The MiG jumped, as if a heavy pack was suddenly removed. Lighter, infinitely more agile. The moment the weapon cleared, the pilot rolled inverted and pulled toward the Earth with every ounce of strength the airframe could muster. 9.5 Gs. The very edge of structural limits. A deep groan came from the left wing root. Not a crack, but not silence either. He ignored it. The aircraft was bending but not breaking, and bent was better than a fireball. The dive took him from 5,000 meters to 500 in just 8 seconds. He accelerated past the speed of sound. The Mach transition was violent. The airframe shuddered. Shockwaves formed and collapsed across the wings. Airspeed, Mach 1.1 and climbing. The S-400 missiles struggled to follow. Their guidance couldn't compute the brutal trajectory change. They were aimed at a ghost, a target that should have continued climbing or flown level. No war analysis predicted this. A supersonic dive toward the Earth. The missile seekers fought to reacquire track, but the lock shattered as the MiG dove below their minimum tracking angle. The missiles continued, unguided. They searched for a ghost, self-destructing at 8,000 meters in silent bursts of fire. The Hammer's rocket motor had already ignited. A violent separation. The ordnance surged skyward as the aircraft hugged the Earth. Two objects, once unified, now executing opposing missions, hurtling in opposite directions at maximum speed. The bomb clawed for altitude past 8,000 meters, trading velocity for height. It was preparing for the terminal dive. Below, the pilot leveled off at 100 meters, a phantom threading through the hills. The terrain itself became his shield. The missile threat was neutralized, but the fuel gauge was now the primary enemy. The afterburner? That climb had devoured 400 kilograms in 12 seconds. The flight home was a brutal equation. Fly with precision or join the ground troops. From behind, the Buk M3 defense systems launched on the Hammer, its radar signature mistaken for the aircraft. A missile gave chase to a bomb, a weapon that could not evade. It was a $1 million interceptor expended on a target already committed to its final, unchangeable trajectory. Like shooting a bullet already in flight. A tactically satisfying but strategically pointless act. The dam now had less than 1 minute. 1 minute to learn a hard lesson of modern warfare. Critical civilian infrastructure can become a key military target. Within 30 seconds, the Hammer reached its apogee at 8,200 meters, then tipped over, beginning its terminal dive. Its infrared seeker activated, the eye of the weapon scanning the ground in thermal wavelengths. The detector array chilled to minus 40 degrees Celsius. This advanced defense technology could see temperature shifts of just 0.1 degrees. The dam appeared, a searing white line, a gash against the cold blue of the water. 8 hours of sunlight had baked the concrete to 35 degrees Celsius. The water stayed at 15. A 20-degree differential. To the weapons war analysis computer, it was a target painted in thermal light. The processor analyzed the shape, comparing it to preloaded target templates. Linear structure. Confirmed. Temperature gradient. Confirmed. Material signature consistent with concrete. Confirmed. GPS position within 10 meters of target. Confirmed. The bomb made a 2.1-degree correction. It was now certain. The target was acquired. The bomb accelerated through 300 meters per second, then 320, then 340. At this velocity, the control fins made micro-adjustments, measured in millimeters. Each tiny movement altered the impact point by meters. The GPS confirmed its position. The INS measured every flicker of acceleration. Two independent systems, two modern weapon systems agreeing on one violent outcome. Impact in 10 seconds, at the pre-designated coordinates. 8 kilometers away, a Ukrainian drone operator observed through his camera as the Hammer entered its terminal phase, a crucial eye in the sky. His finger hovered over the record button. This military update footage would be broadcast to the world. This global conflict documented in real time. The dam below seemed placid, unaware it had 7 seconds left. 6, 5. The operator zoomed his drone in on the predicted impact point. 3, 2, 1. The hammer struck at 340 meters per second. It carried immense kinetic energy. The weapon's smart fuse detected the dense signature of concrete. It detonated 89 kilograms of high explosive in less than a single millisecond. The detonation created a pressure wave, 300,000 pounds per square inch. It turned concrete to powder faster than the material could crack. The shockwave propagated through the dam at 5,000 meters per second, causing the far wall to explode outward before the impact side fully registered the blow. The last supports gave way. A total structural collapse. The breach tore open to 60 meters in the first minute as the current undermined what was left. The crossing point, a critical artery that supported battalion-level military logistics for 3 months, ceased to exist. Russian supply lines were suddenly extended by 47 kilometers, a crippling blow to their warfare operations they had not anticipated. The battlefield had just been redrawn, and the consequences were only beginning.